Hey, good evening, folks, and welcome to Here's the Deal with Luke and Shiloh. My name is Shiloh, and conspicuous by his absence is Luke Simons. He'll be joining us in a few minutes. He is running late at the barber shop, so at any rate, I have here with me tonight, we have Marvin Lepp. So how are you, Marvin?
Doing pretty good, Shiloh. How are you?
We're doing good. So I invited you on tonight. Number one, I'm glad you're on. Thank you for being on with us, taking the time. And I watched your live last night, and I asked you to be on so we could talk a little bit more in depth about the issues that you were bringing up. And
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
no, that's no problem. So, with that being said, where should we start? Where would you like to start?
Oh my.
I,
Yeah, I kind of went rant last night. Um, I guess the whole point of why I went live last night was I've been watching everything so close, and I'm just tired. I'm tired of what is happening in our legislative session. I'm tired of what's being passed and what's being shot down, and uh, all your viewers should be too. Like,
yeah,
there's there is too much garbage coming through the House and Senate this year. Um, and I'm not saying every bill is bad, but for somebody who's reviewed every bill at this point, like, there's a lot of garbage that's coming through. And it seems like we are finding new and more creative ways to spend North Dakota's taxpayer dollars, or change the way boards are made up, or change the way our water rights are handled, or change human services or the Department of Health and the state health officer. It's just ridiculous. And what really had set me off was 1508, which 1508 is the auditor's bill.
mm-hmm.
It should have died in the House. It should have been dead and gone in the House. And then it got stripped down to the point where it was just a CPA to review the auditor's audits, which they don't just audit money. So it made it through the House with being stripped down to that point. And I've been watching it because I knew it was going to come through Senate. And then last week was when the original meeting was supposed to be for it. All of a sudden, there was a new amendment that got brought forward from Representative O'Brien, which made it worse than the original bill. And the hearings at the end of this week, and like, people need to be reaching out to your legislators, to the committee, like putting in testimony. And honestly speaking, when if you can't make it to the Capitol when this is heard in that committee room, y'all need to be submitting online testimony. You need to be sitting in the online queue if you can do it, if you have the time to do it, to break away from your desk to get into the online queue to talk about the bill. And it needs to go away. And it needs to go away to the point where it doesn't get brought back up again. And I'll wait for Luke for some of the stuff that came on because he's going to want to hear it too. It's been getting emails back. I've been getting text messages back all day. I had one person who tried 6 times in the last 24 hours to submit their testimony on the bill. And every time through the state site, it has failed. So we're finding other ways. People that are going to be going to the Capitol to testify are going to be submitting through the clerk at the committee emailed copies that weren't being allowed to be submitted online, because people should be upset. And I think, I mean, it's yet another round of attacks on Josh's office. And it's amazing, like, the arrogance that's attached to it too, the pushback that's coming from the legislators on this. And it's really frustrating looking from the outside, and I can only imagine what it's like being on the inside to be one of the good legislators that is working for you, the amount of pushback that they're feeling on being vocal about this.
Yeah.
So
I know when we had Josh on, at that point in time, it was like you said, they just gutted it to where it was, there had to be an auditor that audited him. So, and it basically, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, not only did it say that, they were also going to put in it that you needed to be a CPA to be eligible to be the state auditor. Now, is that correct, or am I wrong there?
no, it was just a CPA to review the audit findings.
Okay.
Was what it was stripped down to.
Yeah.
But these new amendments, the worst of them was the governor's ability to appoint a special auditor. Right. And that's what's being proposed.
Now, explain to everybody, why would he want to do that? Why would he want to appoint his own auditor?
Why would you not want to be able to rebuke the findings?
Right.
I mean, you look at the North Dakota legendary fiasco. Mm-hmm. That was the last big audit where, like, Josh ended up going to court over it. And the North Dakota legendary logo originally was approved for a way lower amount by the legislature. And by the time it was all said and done, it was a ridiculous amount of money that got spent on the whole Be Legendary thing. And the director of the Department of Commerce at that point had already resigned. Miss Comer had come in. And so when this audit had released, she was the head of the department at that time. So it wasn't even her actions that had gotten to that point, but it was at that point she was the face of that department when all the stuff hit the fan. And so it very much got portrayed as he was attacking her on this when he was just reviewing the findings as to what they had found on it. Mm-hmm. And the logo itself, if I remember right, went to out of state to be redone by some company out in Minnesota. But anytime he comes up with findings that somebody doesn't like, it's all over the news and it looks horrible. So now with this update on the bill, if the governor doesn't like the findings, he'll have his own auditor to audit the auditor's office.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it sounds like a Dr. Seuss book. It really does. It's ridiculous the amount of positions that the governor can already appoint, which was another part of my rant last night. And it's at that point where, honestly, if that's the way it's going to be, then we should have a full-time legislature. So every time he wants to appoint somebody, we can have a Senate confirmation hearing to approve or deny whoever he's appointing. And I don't like the sound of a full-time legislature. I don't know about you, but it seems like every time they go out of sessions when we start having shady stuff like this carbon capture happening across the state. And then the other problem you run into is the only ones that can call legislature back into session is the governor or the legislative leaders. So you look at 2020, they could have called a special session because they hadn't used all their days to stop some of the mandates that were getting pushed through, and the leaders chose not to.
Now hindsight's 2020. We kind of know why they didn't. I mean,
Well, yeah,
if you think about it,
yeah.
so so something that you said last night that I thought was quite interesting and that I hadn't thought about it. I do talk to Jeff Magram quite a bit, um, and some of the others. But I found it interesting that you said that the legislators that are fighting for us, they're burning out. Um, and I'm going to give you an opportunity here to kind of expand on that, but I think you're right. There are some of them that are starting to burn out, and why do you think that is? I mean, some of them are just elected this year, or in 22 for this session. So
The thing I feel most sorry for our freshman legislators,
mm.
um, because there's so many of them that got elected. They had their moral compass on, they have their principles on, they have their, like, they know their direction, what they're going to do, what they're going to vote. And I think some of the burnout is when these bills are being presented to be voted on, they're not getting the whole truth. The other thing is you look at, it's what, almost 1,000 bills between concurrent resolution and bills that got brought forward.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine telling yourself the entire time that you're running that you are going to do your very best to read and review every bill? And then we have the largest legislative session probably ever in North Dakota for the sheer amount of bills.
Mm-hmm.
Just the pre-filed bills, there was 250. I mean, that's manageable over 80 days to be able to fairly review and evaluate. But to hit almost 1,000 bills, and some of these are 70 pages, 80 pages long,
Right.
like just going through one 80-page bill, you're looking 12 hours of your day that you're going to have to give up. 12 dedicated hours to go through. And that's insane. But then you have the peer pressure that starts to get applied to you. You have the leadership that's coming down on you that's going to promise that they're going to pull your bills out of certain committees so that they don't die in that committee. And as soon as the crossover happens, all of a sudden bills are ending up in committees that they shouldn't be in, after promises that it's not going to happen that way. Or you look at Magrum. Magrum brought forward some amazing election bills.
Yep.
And amazing bills. I testified on a couple of them. And with the amendments that we had made with one on his bill that would have decertified the election equipment to where we have a level 4 compliant, which is the highest level of compliance on our elections in the country. We're one of the only states that isn't. And with those amendments, it would have brought a level of election integrity to North Dakota this state has never seen. But to watch every one of those bills fail through committee and then fail on the floor, I mean, can you imagine how defeating that is?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd never
Yeah.
run another election bill in your life.
Yeah. And I've talked with Jeff a little bit about that too, and I called just to check up on him and and stuff, and so I know he's had some hard days, but I'll give the man credit. He's still getting after it. I have a lot of respect for him. I really
Oh
do.
yeah, there's a lot of fire and brimstone there. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, another thing that I'd like to talk to you about from last night. and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is the governor appointing people. So how does that take place? Let's just, for people who don't understand how that all works, can we explain that just a little bit? I mean,
There's
pick
so
wherever you want to go with that.
there's so many positions within the state that are governor appointed. It's ridiculous. Your water boards, your school, the state school board, your state health officer, your Department of Human Services head. There's so many different commissions that he appoints.
Yep.
It's ridiculous, and it's all in century code. That's how he appoints. But what really bothers me is, take health and human services again. You have a $5 billion investment coming from the legislative assembly. It's like 4.6 was the proposal. The governor's proposal is like 5.6 billion. I don't know what they settled on.
Yeah.
The most amount of money spent per biennium goes to health and human services, to an appointed position with zero public accountability. And that's not even taking into account the sheer amount of appropriations that are asked for across the other bills.
Hold that thought a minute.
Yep.
I got Luke with
Perfect.
us. Everybody's favorite Barber Rancher guy, Luke. Are you there?
I
We're
am.
live, buddy.
I am. I apologize. I'm working late tonight. I'm listening.
How you
All
doing?
right.
I'm doing really well, Marv. I'll be with you guys in a little bit, showing my pretty smiling face, and you're going to see all the viewers the women will start going crazy. Well, keep on. Great show.
All right. Go ahead, Marv. Finish your thought.
So, I mean, by the time it's said and done, give me half a second. What, honey? Good job.
Oh, it must be his daughter.
Yeah, I'm getting a daddy from the background. You look at overall, I mean, when you take all these bills to all the departments, to the zero accountability because they're not elected, that was part of my rant, and why I came back to why we should have confirmation hearings on them.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise we're just kicking a rock down the road and not having accountability, which ties back to our state auditor, who is an elected official, who does represent the people. We put him there. We voted him there. He should have the ability to be able to go in upon request or review or petition, like in Williston, and review what's actually going on there. Now he's going to be doing the Bismarck School District, which is going to be interesting too, because you look at even the Bismarck School Board or your city councils or city commissions. How many meetings have you been to where there's been a project that's needed to be done, and they use a century code in order to declare emergency? It's 44 01.2, I think it is, or 01.4. But what that does is it allows them to bypass the bidding process in order to start a construction project. In June, the June 13th meeting at Bismarck School Board, they voted and approved to do that for the Century parking lot. They spent $1.2 million to redo the Century parking lot, which was already decided by the 23rd of June. Because the second part of that Century code, as it reads, is they don't need to even put out the bids at that point. They can just appoint somebody to do it. They don't need to file it in the paper. They don't need to wait for the 15 days. Here it goes. And if you really want, I can turn it up for you quick. But how many times are we seeing this and not even knowing truly what it is? Like, how many of these, the times that that's being done, it's going to a buddy, it's going to themselves through LLC or a LLP that they sublet the work out, and they're kicking back and feeding money back to themselves. I mean, how many legislators were pissed off when the bill came forward for them to be able to have to reveal what companies that they're attached to that the state is leasing land from or leasing buildings from? Like, they don't like their secrets exposed. And you have to have somebody, you have to have a line of defense at the end of it. And that's what our state auditor does. And that's, again, ties us back to 1508. If these new amendments come through, the governor can appoint. It's one giant circle. So sorry if I'm repeating myself while we're talking here.
No.
It's very frustrating from the outside looking in. And really, our best line of defense right now is contacting your legislators. Like, we shouldn't have passed 1082, but we did.
Yeah.
And I mean, on top of 1082, you have other bills that change the way that credit unions can dissolve. And it's kind of ironic that you have all that stuff going through. But at the same point, don't believe in coincidence either.
I hear you there.
There's just too much of a pattern happening.
Yeah.
I will give this legislative session credit, though, because I mean, they were clever enough to break up a lot of bills. So unless you put together the puzzle, you can't see the whole picture. So, I mean, just 5006 in one of the initial runs, and that's your Department of Human Services, had 16 bills between House and Senate changing Century Code. And I don't even know what the final count was. I'm sure it's probably closer to 30. But the other thing that's bothered me too is, like, if you look at the original version of the budget bills just in House, quite a few of them got changed in their final form where those are affecting Century Code too. And the code that got added mimics other bills that got shot down. So they're still going to get their way. They just pushed it onto the budget bill. So I don't know what to say other than y'all should be pissed.
I think there's a lot of us that are, and we're talking about it a little bit earlier too, is the burnout factor sets in with some of us. So,
well, I see it.
Yeah.
I see it. I mean, my phone fills with messages of people feeling defeated, and we can't feel defeated because you still have that level of accountability when it comes back to these guys coming back to your meet and greets of the legislative district. Like, you should be ready for them.
The problem is, I feel that when they do that kind of stuff, and I'm not telling people not to be involved or anything like that. That's the last thing I would tell anyone. But I feel that they're kind of geared up for that, and they say all the right things, and they have the let's go get them Gipper attitude all the time when they're around their constituents. But when they get down to Bismarck, that all goes out the door. And then there is some that I feel that are just like, whatever, I'm going to do what I want to do. And that's, you don't like it, vote me out. So with that being said, I know before when we were talking, just before we went on air, you made a comment about uh, getting some feedback from people who had sent emails and made calls. So, what was the feedback that you were getting?
My favorite negative feedback received by a constituent got texted me this afternoon. It came from Judy Lee,
Mm-hmm.
who's one of my very favorite senators when it comes to bills. Her response was, "It is unfortunate that you have not seen the information or watched the meetings with which the auditor has been involved. He has strongly criticized people and departments in his audits, not having provided all the facts when only a few statements will make him look good, regardless of whether or not the whole truth is included. Fine people's reputations are damaged by his interest in promoting himself." Um, I'll keep reading this one, then we'll talk about it. "He wants to present the image of protecting the taxpayers' money when his main purpose is to promote himself. This legislature is working hard at putting in very long days to thoroughly study and move forward bills which will serve North Dakota well, including tax reform, human service expansion to serve vulnerable individuals, education funding, and many other complicated issues, always trying to serve people well while assuring that the programs are funded with taxpayers in mind. Social media doesn't want to do the homework on the tough issues, so you see no news about it. They'd rather print titillating headlines that will catch everyone's eye about simple and often foolish topics. These bills waste our time, or those bills waste our time. Be careful whom you criticize. Perhaps a little fact finding might be a good idea first." Well, Judy, I'm going to turn this around for a second.
Yep.
I've done my homework. I don't know how much that you can see.
Go over just a little bit more.
I've done my homework. There you go.
There you go.
I've done my homework, Judy. So you're not saving anybody any money. Like, and this isn't the first time I've seen her attack people. During COVID, when they were talking about all the mask mandates coming into place, my wife had sent all the legislators an email, and Judy sent back a 2-page rant comparing COVID to the 1918 flu pandemic, and how she makes people that write her appear uneducated. That's who's the whip for the Senate Health and Human Services. That's terrifying. That's disturbing. Hey, Luke, how are you?
I am well. Sorry about that, you guys.
No, no worries.
You started talking about one of my favorite people, Judy Lee, and Judy Lee has a all-time voting score of I think 14 with the Constitution, 100 being good. Judy Lee has a 14, if I'm not mistaken. Judy Lee is a Democrat by every Republican, even rhinos realize that she is a Democrat. So I could give no care to anything she says. I sat on the Lafferty committee, Marv, as you probably knew.
Yep.
And when she made those comments, what untruthful comments. Josh Gallion comes in there with all the facts and they don't even want to look at them. You should have seen Judy Lee's face. I mean, just distorted, just like demonic. She reminded me of Nancy Pelosi when she acted the way she did, because she literally went like this. She didn't want to hear what Josh Gallion found because they were all her pet projects. So I just couldn't agree with you more.
Well, and I mean, as far as I know, she's the one that spearheaded the whole bill where legislators can't be FOIA'd on their emails too, isn't she?
I'm not familiar with that. I can't give
20,
you
2019, if you go back and look. That legislative session is like, even the Tribune articles had her at the podium sitting and talking why this bill needed to be passed. And that's why we as citizens can't submit FOIA requests for legislative emails. So the only way you can get them is to find out who is talking and getting the responses.
Huh. Yeah, I feel sorry for her. I really do. She is the worst Republican in the Senate that I could possibly think of. As you know, both of you know.
Yeah. Well, what I was talking about last night, which is funny because I didn't name names at that point, but Representative Christensen has that the parentage bill that is coming through, and it landed in her committee. And she was more concerned, and if you go back and find the video, she was more concerned how the state was going to collect child support than about parents having the rights to raise their children. Like, we had the concurrent resolution last session that Representative Christian brought forward, where the parents are the primary stakeholders. This was further protecting your rights as a parent. And ultimately, if you look at everything that they're doing with these bills, what they're doing with human services, what they're doing with the schools, what they're attempting to do with our children, his bill completely offsets all these bills that are coming forward, because it puts us in charge of our children's future. It has nothing to do with child support. It puts us in charge of our children's future.
Are you suggesting that we're not? I mean, we're just the government's not the ward of our children? I mean, what are you suggesting here?
Well, I'm suggesting that if all these bills pass, like, elections won't matter because human services will be running the state.
That was done on purpose.
Absolutely.
Why don't you go into that?
If you look at how much that department's grown over the last 5 years, over the last decade, each session there is more and more rights given to human services and more rights taken from parents. And something I brought back up, circling to 2020, the Bismarck School Board meeting in September of 2020 is where, like, this all clicked for me. And it was, they were bringing forward the whole mask mandate garbage. And as I'm reading my speech is when it clicked, because part of what I said was the Century Code that refers to the inoculations required of your children to attend school. This was before the COVID vaccine was even being produced. What I had further asked was, what is the school going to do to children who have religious exemptions to not be vaccinated to enter school? Were they going to deny these children access? And because every parent signs that parental form at the beginning of the school year, did the school district have the right to forcefully vaccinate the children once it released? And that's where you realize that they're using Century Code against us, not for us. Because 23010512 in the current form, not the bill that's coming through from 1165, gives the state health officer the right to conduct special immunization activities. What's not to say the state health officer says that there's a pandemic breakout at BHS High School? What's not to say they can't say, we're going to give your kids this shot whether you like it or not?
Well, Marv, did you see what just happened in DC? went through midnight. Did you see this? I posted all over my Facebook page, but most people aren't familiar with it. I'm guessing you are. The World Health Organization just came out and passed a bill that said that the World Health Organization in the next crisis will administer blanket over every country the exact same rules and regulations for all countries, so it'll be fair, because we are looking at a global pandemic. Now, I kid you not. Now, I'm going to give a shout out to John Hoven here, because he actually wrote a bill opposing this. So thank you, Mr. Hoven, if you're watching. You and I probably disagree a whole lot, but I will say you were right on that bill, and I thank you for that. I applaud you for that. I thank you. But then take what you're saying, Marvin, with what that just now, and you can go just a couple clickety clicks down on my page, anybody that's watching, and find all the facts on that. It's all U.S. Congress, all right in U.S. Centrico, our
Yes.
law, and and find out what the state health department is doing in link with, and we shouldn't even call it Lutheran Social Services anymore, because it's state social services. And for those of you that are watching, and I think all three of us know perfectly well, Lutheran Social Services was funded about 97% with North Dakota money for a very long time. It started out as a great organization from the Lutheran Brotherhood, Lutheran Church, which was a great thing. Then the state started funding them, and of course, it was private, but then they went bankrupt just a couple of years ago, if we recall.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And the state took it over. It is now the biggest entity of North Dakota state government. It even beats out, if I'm not mistaken, it beats out our colleges. Marvin, am I wrong there? Yeah, I might be wrong.
No.
So don't go to the bank with that. That would take some research. I'm not saying that that's a fact. But if it's not, it's very, very close, okay? So now you have Lutheran Social Services, like you were saying, Marvin, doing this, administering it in our schools with the World Health Organization combined. You tell me that's not scary? That's scary. And that's kind of what you're saying.
You know what's scarier, though, Luke? If your viewers go on to, when they're done with the show here, you go onto the internet, just a blank search bar, type in EPR, Edward Paul Robert, Vaccination Management Plan, and watch what comes up first. So that has been on North Dakota's books since May of 2014. It's literally the entire COVID plan that got brought forward in 2020. It's underneath the Department of Health. It's right there. Page 2 tells you how to talk about masks. Page 4 tells you there's going to be a demand for the vaccine. The end of it gives you literally the order in which the vaccine needs to be distributed. It's been on our book for almost a decade now. And it's very easy for people to research. So I'm not scared to talk about it because I can prove it's there. Like, so you can't discount it. It's not crazy if you can prove it. And you know me, Luke, I don't talk about something unless I can prove it.
No.
But we need to wake up, because it goes back to the governor appoints. And part of what I talked about last night was the doctors that were talking out at all these meetings in 2020, the doctors that signed the letters to all the mayors, were the same doctors that in 2017 led the CHI revolt. You can compare the signature sheet side by side next to each other and compare the names. And at that point, our Department of Human Services head was the head of St. Alexis CHI. So they all worked for him. Joan Connell, who signed off on the state health officer orders, she signed some of those orders before our state health officers did in 2020 for the lockdowns, the quarantines. Again, worked for Chris Jones at CHI.
Huh.
So, again, why I say I don't believe in coincidence. There's too much history. It's just so many of us have been so asleep for so long that you don't see it. Like, how many people remember that back in the 90s there was the proposed nuclear waste site up in Sawyer, North Dakota, that our legislature at that point killed. Now I'm hearing rumblings that they want to use that granite formation again for disposing nuclear waste.
Yeah.
We killed it once. We shouldn't have to kill it again. But we go through this cycle of forgetfulness where we get complacent. Everything's going the way it's supposed to, or the way we think it should be. And now we're all scrambling to catch up again.
Well, the American people have a attention span of a gnat, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, when you have a legislature that is showing so much content right now, Marvin, where were you at, if you don't mind me asking, on the term limits?
I was really torn.
Okay.
I didn't like the 8 and 8, and I actually pulled Magrum aside at Becker's on election night. I go, why wasn't it 16 years and done? Didn't matter if it was House or Senate. My problem with the 8 and 8, and I was vocal about it, was if you have somebody that's doing a good job that wants to do 16 years, you have twice the amount of people in the House as you do in the Senate.
That's a valid point, actually.
So all of a sudden now 8 years is up, say they all get elected at the same time, we're going to lose a good legislature or a good legislator.
Yeah.
Because there's no place for them to go.
Correct. I thought about that too, but I never thought of it. I actually never put it to words. That's a very valid point. So I was against the term limits, as written. I'm for the constitutional term limits, which are called the elections. Because if people aren't paying attention, it doesn't matter if we have, if you replace one idiot with another idiot, it doesn't really matter. So, but the point is, and I'm not trying to argue about that, but we have a legislature that is so arrogant that in the ballot measure, they said that the legislature could not change the law. And now they're changing the law. That's why they keep bringing bullcrap like this back up time and time again, because they are playing us like cattle, like sheep. They are literally pushing us. That's exactly what's happening.
And the worst part is it's going to end up getting drugged back into litigation again, which is going to cost us money.
Just taxpayers, not us personally. Yeah, I mean taxpayers.
Yeah, taxpayers.
Right. Right. And get it right.
Yeah. And it's ridiculous because, I understand why some of them voted on the way it's amended. I've talked with a few of our legislators an awful lot, good legislators that are green on it. And we went round and round on it for not just an hour or two, talking a couple weeks of conversation regarding it. And my thing is if the legislators are going to mess with it the way they have, they need to put term limits on everybody. I'm talking your county commission, your township, your school board, your elected positions. And if they're going to take it that far, then they need to take it a step further where nobody else in the House or themselves can't work for a government entity while they're holding an elected position. You look at Danelle Presky, who's the head of the counties. She's on the Bismarck School Board. She's elected there. She's the head of the counties. 2020, she's the one that came forward and said that we were not counting the ballots early, even after the governor issued order executive 2020-13-1 in November or October, saying that they could count early. And she also sits on the League of Sheriffs Board, So at what point are we having huge conflicts of interest? Because you look at the Emily Eckroth situation here, where that school board, the Bismarck School Board, played the video from that traffic stop that somebody obtained because it was leaked from the sheriff's department. Again, I don't believe in coincidence that the video got leaked and then showed up at a school board that the same person that's involved in two different positions would have access to.
See, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about right now. What are you talking?
Emily got elected in June. Very contested election. She won by like 2 votes. They actually recounted stuff like that. There was an unfortunate incident involving a traffic stop where her husband was driving, and the whole scenario got to the point where it got out of hand. It probably could have been handled a lot more professionally by a lot of people. But instead of rebuking her privately and finding a way to resolve, the Bismarck School Board decided to put it all very, 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 very public. I mean, I wonder where I've seen that before. And then the recall started circling, and my favorite part about the recall, like I'm all for following the processes and steps, but the recall's circulating, and somebody that knew me, who knows I'm active in politics and stuff, asked me to sign the recall for Emily. And I go, I'll sign the recall for Emily when you have one for Kirsten Baszler too.
True enough.
And they looked at me and they're shocked and they're like, well, this is different. I'm like, how is it different? How is this different at all? And they couldn't give me an answer. We can't hold that double standard. You know, that whole rules for thee and not for me needs to stop. And our legislators need to realize that. Your county commission, your city commission, your school boards, your township boards need to realize that. That needs to stop. And I think one of the biggest stories from when I was campaigning that I didn't really talk about was right after I spoke at Hazelton at the District 8 nominating convention. I got reached out to from a citizen, and they were having issues at this point, it doesn't matter. It was Apple Creek School District.
I went to school in Apple Creek.
Okay, so Apple Creek had, it was like 3 or 4 very good teachers.
Yes, I do.
All of a sudden put in their notice of resignation at the same time.
You're kidding.
Because they were having issues with the superintendent, they were having issues with the school board, they were having issues with CREA, Central Regional Education Association, which is led by Luke Schaefer. So they had formal complaints, formal letters of complaint. There was supposedly an investigation going on at the same time where they had to sign their contracts for renewal. And instead of signing their contracts of renewal, they chose to be done. So this school, which is 86 students and only had 7 teachers, all of a sudden was losing half their teaching staff because they were having issues. And I read all the letters and I read all the reviews, and I got really interested in what was going on with CREA. And I actually had probably a 45-minute conversation with Mr. Schaefer before the school board meeting where everything went sideways. And it's amazing because they're in all your rural schools. If you go to their website, they're in like 57 schools between the south side of the state all the way up past Minot. They're supposed to be handling education services, after school programs, like a bunch of different stuff. But the kicker in Apple Creek was they were doing their before school program, their after school program. They were their office managers, plus they were the ones conducting the review of the teachers' complaints, which the teachers at the school board meeting prior to this investigation starting didn't know that they could formally request these reviews. So this was some horrible informal investigation. So the school board meeting happens. I came. I was asked to come. I sat and listened for a while. I listened to what they were saying. I listened to what this school board was saying. I listened to all the garbage that was being spewed. And I already knew at that point that Apple Creek was $1 million a year school. For 86 students, they were bringing in $1 million a year of income. These teachers are making, what, $50,000 a year? The superintendent who was hired to be, or the principal that was hired was supposed to be a teacher plus a principal, was making $90,000 plus. But the numbers didn't add up. And when I started asking questions, all of a sudden they were backpedaling, and I started producing copies of Century Code to the school board and pointing out where they were making all these mistakes. And I had the school board president so worked up that when it came to their upcoming election, they had already had one member resign. So the school board was telling everybody that, well, first place was going to get one position, second place was going to get another position. But two of the candidates hadn't even filed. And according to state law, that you have to announce what position you're running for. But I had him so flabbergasted with that when I pushed the Century Code on it. He goes, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I looked at him. I looked him dead in the eye. I go, so how many of you are sitting on this board that were illegally elected? Needless to say, there is one remaining member of that school board as of this fall. 4 of them resigned.
Can you explain that? What do you mean by that?
They all quit as soon as they got any sort of pressure, as soon as the citizens started showing up to defend their teachers.
Well, illegally, what do you mean by that? Illegally,
because what they would do is if there was 2 positions, well, you have to, say you're running for your city commissioner mayor. When you fill out that candidacy form, you have to designate what area you're running for. Well, school boards run in 3-year terms. There was a remaining 2-year term that was available to be run for because one of the other school board members had resigned because of everything that was going on, not feeling that she was being supported. So now there was a 3-year term and a 2-year term that was on the ballot. And the school board president was telling everybody that, oh, well, it doesn't matter. We're just going to fill the spots first place, second place for these terms, which is very much against state law. So that when I pointed out that 2-year term would be write-in only, it couldn't be anybody that was filed for, they got awful flustered with me and said, well, that's the way we've always done
I don't see why you're such a troublemaker.
Me? I mean,
just a troublemaker.
I am.
Why would you care if they're following state law? I mean, there's rule of law, concept, and we the people are the government, and it just seems like a lot of conspiratorial stuff. I mean, why don't you have a life, Marvin? Why are you doing that?
I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do.
It is.
Because they pissed me off, and now they have my full attention.
The Bible says if you dig a pit for your neighbor to fall into, for your enemy to fall into, you yourself will fall into it.
So go ahead.
We got about 5 minutes left or so. You want to give us kind of a rundown on what we should look for in the next few days or weeks with the session?
Well, there's still so much coming through. When we get done with the show tonight, if you guys don't mind, in the comments I'll drop this bill study so people can actually go look.
That'd be great.
I'm about as far with it as I can get because they keep amending and changing I did the basic run through on the 1,000 bills. I've been through checking for amendments, but really what it is I took all of their bills that they're bringing forward. I took our actual century code per chapter, transferred it all into one group of documents. I mean, it's 17 documents long. Probably 4,000 to 5,000 pages worth of work. And everything that's read in the documents is being removed. It's gone. If it's green, it's straight up being repealed. If it's blue, it's being added. And take some of it with a grain of salt, because there's been amendments from where I first started to where I am now, because I started this right before sessions started, working about 12 hours a day to get it to where it is now. So I don't sleep a lot. So on the main page, if it's underlined, it's linked to the source material. At the end of the bills, at the end of each section of Century Code, I have all the bills listed with the version that I had at the time where I was working on it. So you can see the progression. But the most alarming thing is I'll do an index. So you can literally pick and choose your fights using this document. The index will have all the century codes. So like 3822, I'll have it linked to the document that's attached to this, where you can go look at carbon capture and what they're doing there. If you're concerned about water rights, you'll be able to go to that part of the document. It's massive and it looks overwhelming, but I really did make it user friendly for you folks. But I mean, Jan's right there, 15:08, 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. That right now is our most immediate concern. We figure out how we fix this digital currency BS. And on top of that, we have the side fight going with the Public Service Commission going on an eminent domain right now. And the kicker on the eminent domain in this carbon capture pipeline is back in 2021. There's a presidential order. It was like 10,996 or 997. I can find that for you guys if you really want it. Page 56 of that document straight up says that carbon capture is not good for a community. EPA issued this to President Biden, that carbon capture is detrimental to communities. And yet we're getting it shoveled down our throats.
Yeah.
So
it's really...
you need to be paying attention, folks. The oil extraction taxes, where they're going to put zero extraction tax on re-stimulation wells for 5 years. I'm all about oil booms. I'm all about oil extraction taxes, funding our programs, our schools. But why are we going to give these big companies a free pass for 5 years on wells that weren't active for longer than 24 months? That sounds like billions of dollars of lost tax revenue for the state of North Dakota, if you ask me. And if we had a state auditor that wasn't continuously getting attacked, guess what? We'd probably be seeing more of our money back.
Yep, that's for sure. Well, with that, I appreciate your time, Marvin, and all the work that you do. I know you do a lot of research and stuff for people, and just want to let you know that there's a lot of us that appreciate that, myself included.
I'm not fun.
So
well, you guys shouldn't be either. Don't lose faith. Don't lose hope. You know, the devil's hardest on you when you're on the right path.
On every level, there's a different devil.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got to remember that. On every level, there's a different devil. You know what?
Well,
God never said it would be easy. He just said, do what's right.
Absolutely.
Right. It works. It's kind of interesting. We live in a day and age where, I mean, I do a lot of reading. And when I read about, the early Continental Army, 1775, actually started in 1764 is basically when the real revolt started to happen in 1776. But saying that, most of America were opposing the Patriots, and they said, "You guys are nilly willies. You guys are squeaky wheels. You guys are, making big deals over nothing." And thank God they did. Thank God they did.
So,
Well, folks,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our founding fathers had it right, that's for sure.
absolutely, they were the original radicals, extremists. Folks,
well, with
call
that,
her a night. Thank you much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. You are amazing and you're an inspiration. I just
Oh,
want that.
likewise.
well, thanks, Mark.
Thank
You have a good
Thanks
night.
for
you too. Bye.
all right.